Welcome to Legends in Leadership, brought to you by ISF and the Carrington Group. Legends in Leadership is an inspirational podcast featuring the stories of leaders who are making a difference. Our goal is to inspire you with the stories of leaders who come from humble beginnings, overcome challenges, and ultimately rise up to make a difference in people's lives.
This is Tyler Tillman. I want to welcome you to Legends in Leadership, episode number 10. I'm a family officer with the Carrington Group, and my co-hosts on today's podcast are Dr. Blair Ritchie, who's the Executive Director of the International Student Foundation, and Jason Smith, who is a business partner of mine and also a family officer with the Carrington Group. So, gentlemen, welcome to the show. We like to kick off each week with a little bit of leadership trivia. We're fascinated by the stories of leaders who, like us, come from humble beginnings and then rise up as leaders to make a difference in people's lives. So, Dr. Blair, kick us off with a little bit of leadership trivia today.
I got a fun one today, Tyler. Today's Legend in Leadership was ranked by ESPN as the 6th greatest North American athlete of the 20th century. He was the son of a sharecropper, the youngest of 10 children, born in Alabama, but his family then moved north to Ohio. As a lad, he worked delivering groceries, unloading freight cars, and as a helper in a shoe repair shop. But his passion was running, and man, could he run. He ran so fast that he became known as the Buckeye Bullet, winning a record 8 individual NCAA records while attending The Ohio State University. But the world marveled at his talent by the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, where he captured the gold medals in the 100-meter, 200-meter, 4x100-meter relay, and the long jump. Fascinating that he became a poignant irony that the most decorated athlete of the Olympics, which Adolf Hitler wanted to be the showcase for Nazi Germany, was a black American. While he always felt snubbed by then President Roosevelt, he would go on to be honored with medals of honor from Presidents Ford, Carter, and George H.W. Bush. Do you know who today's Legend in Leadership is? I'll be back at the end of the show to give the answer.
Very decorated. Usually we know the answers to these, but today I don't have a clue.
You're too young.
Okay. Well, folks.
Right now?
Yeah.
Really? You don't know?
Folks, excited about introducing you to today's guest, who is currently the weeknight sports anchor for ABC's Dallas affiliate, WFAA Channel 8. He also hosts Dale Hansen's Sports Special on Sundays at 10:35 p.m. And consistently, that show is one of the highest rated local programs here in DFW. Dale, great to have you on the show today.
It's my pleasure.
You've been with Channel 8 for more than 35 years. My family, I can tell you, we've enjoyed all of those years. And we especially enjoy when you get to go unplugged and really let it rip a little. We're looking forward today to having a conversation with you about some of your journey and what you've learned about leadership along the way. But to kick things off, you and your wife, Chris, or more properly known as the Miss Hansen.
The lovely Mrs. Hansen.
The lovely Mrs. Hansen. Recently attended our 10th anniversary International Student Foundation Gala, and you very generously, I must say, provided us 3 different dinner packages where everybody can come out and enjoy the Hansen Ranch experience. So each package is for 3 couples where you're providing round-trip limo service, all the food, drinks, and cigars that they can eat. And by the way, folks, those packages auctioned off for $15,000. That's truly fantastic. It was very generous of you and the lovely Mrs. Hansen to do that for us, and we just really want to thank you for your generosity.
Oh, no, it's our pleasure. We've done that quite a bit over the years. One, I think it's a great cause, but 2, it's also usually a great deal of fun. I meet a lot of interesting people along the way, and we kind of live in a society where I don't know many of my neighbors anymore. And this is one of the best ways to meet people. And then, of course, I get the write-off at the end of the year. So it's it's a win-win situation. Yeah.
Well, a great segue, and it really leads me to my first question today. You've been engaged in the community with charities throughout your career, and Dale, there are so many to choose from. And by the way, so many amazing charities to choose from. So tell me, why at this stage of the game, how is ISF, or why have you chosen ISF to be one of the charities that you support?
Well, almost any charity that I try to support, whether it's with my checkbook or with my time, I'm always looking for that hands-on, immediate response. I mean, as you point out, there are thousands of great charities, and they're all good. I mean, but my family's been racked by cancer. But if I donate a X amount of dollars to the American Cancer Society, that kind of gets lost in the paperwork and the paper clips and the pens and the pencils. I don't have enough money, in my opinion, to make a real difference there. But I can, in my opinion, make a real difference with ISF because I see the kids that you've helped. I see the young person's life that has been changed by ISF. And I like to see that immediate feedback. I gave a scholarship years ago to my school back home, and the different I was with different organizations, but I'm always trying to find some way, somehow, for that personal satisfaction, as selfish as this might be, that personal satisfaction of seeing the person whose life has been changed, and then I feel like I might have played a small role in that. And I think that's what this organization does. I mean, the times I've been to your banquets now, and you have the people coming up telling their stories and where they come from and how they've achieved what they have, it's remarkable to me. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable to me. And, I'm glad to help in my small way.
Well, we really appreciate it, and I will tell you, you are, in fact, making a huge difference, and we can't do it without generous folks like yourself, so thank you. This show is about leadership, and we want to spend some time unwrapping that with you in a couple of different ways today. First, I'd like our audience to hear some of your leadership journey, and then I'd like our audience to hear about some of the leaders you got to know in your journey. In fact, we're saving the best for last, and at the end of our show today, I'm asking Dale that you reveal who you consider to be the best leader that you ever met, somebody who made an impact in your life. But before we get to that, I want to start off today and learn a little bit about you. Where'd you grow up? Talk a little bit about your mom and your dad and how they impacted you and how that served you in your leadership journey.
Well, that's a long story in many ways. I'll try to do it as quick as I can. But I grew up in this little small farm town in Iowa, Logan, Iowa, about 25 miles northeast of Omaha, Nebraska. It's why a lot of people always think that I'm from Nebraska, because when I was in the Navy, I would tell people, they said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Iowa." They said, "Whereabouts?" I said, "Logan." They said, "Well, never heard of it. Where is it?" And I said, "Right next to Omaha." They go, "That's in Nebraska." And I said, "Oh, my gosh." So I just started telling people I'm from Omaha because it was easier in my Navy days. But I was in this little small farm town, and I really did. I grew up, as I've said many times, in the Mayberry of the Midwest. We never locked our doors. The keys were always in the car. We played well past dark. We walked every place we went or rode our bikes. Nobody really worried about anything. It was just a great place to grow up. And I grew up in this little town, and as my dad said, it was always kind of funny. My dad owned his little trucking company. He had 2 trucks. He hauled freight up and down these little 3-town, Logan, Woodbine, Dunlap. And every morning he would make that run, while his other driver would go to Omaha and pick up all the freight from the warehouses. My mom was a beautician, so she had a little tiny beauty shop across the street, and it was Mayberry, and I loved it. My dad was a very hard man, and I've said this many times. He was the hardest working man I've ever known in my life. He was up about 4:30, 5 o'clock every day, head down, have breakfast downtown, start doing his freight run. And then during the summer, he'd usually be done by 10:30, 11 o'clock. And he'd go out to the different farms and just work on the farm, because he was an actual farm boy. And he just helped the farmers. He just liked working on the farm. And then he'd usually go back to the local bar, have a couple of drinks, come home for dinner, and then do book work all night long. He did all his own book work. And he did it 6 days a week. And it was staggering. He was strict. He was demanding. But I told him shortly before he died, thanks, because I hated him for a long time. I rebelled against him every chance I could. And shortly before he died, I thanked him for providing me the life that I have now. And he just looked at me and said, well, I did the best I could. And I said, well, you did good, Dad. You did good. And it's when you talk about leaders, when you talk about opportunities to influence a young person's life, I didn't recognize it for a long time. But my dad runs through me, and as I get older, I'm starting to look like him, and I hate it. But you know, I'm not as strong as him. I certainly didn't work as hard as him, but he was a classic example. One of my favorite stories. We used to have this. We were the county seat, so the carnival would come through town on the 4th of July and set up camp for 3, 4, 5 days. And there was this little corner bar called Buck and Bubbles. And the strong man, you remember the old strong man in the carnival would always walk into the bar. Every year they did this. And anybody could beat me arm wrestling, I'll buy a round of drinks for the house. And everybody goes, well, go get him, Merv, go get him. So my dad would go up there and just beat him every year. And I'm like, how? I mean, these guys would have biceps, about like the size of my thigh or something, which my dad did also, by the way. And he would beat this guy. And several years went by, and I said one night, I'll never forget, I said, how do you do that? He said, oh, it's just, and he really did. He talked to me, just a trick. It's just a trick, I said, what do you mean it's a trick? He said, well, Dale, you just hold him. He said, especially the strong guys, they want to snap you down real fast. So you just brace yourself and hold them, and then they'll eventually have to kind of regrip, and then when they do, you push them down. And I looked at him, I said, well, what if you can't hold him? No, you can hold anybody. You can. No, you can't, Dad. I said, no, you really can't. But he could. And hey, he had a lot of free drinks at Buck and Bubbles by beating the strong man. But then I just went off to the Navy. Excuse me. Because of my rebellious attitude, he threw me out of the house my senior year. I finished all my sports. And I went out and drank 4 beers with my buddies because I wanted to prove to everybody how tough a guy I was. So I went to my grandmother's house because 4 beers back in those days was way too many beers. It kind of sound like I ought to be on the Supreme Court. I liked beer. I drank beer, and I did black out. Not that time. But so I went to my grandmother's house. And the sweetest little old lady, and so she fixes me something to eat and puts me into bed and calls my dad and said, oh, Mervyn, Dale, this is so great. Dale and all his buddies came over to see me, and my dad, his radar went up. And next thing I know, he's dragging me out of bed. He looks at me in the car and kind of slaps me upside the head. He said, look at you, you're stupid drunk. And he takes me to the sheriff's office and tells Louis Allstott, the sheriff, lock him up. And as I'm going into this jail cell, he tells me, tell Louis where you got the beer. Tell Louis where you got the beer. And Louis's about ready to die because we got the beer from the deputy.
Oh, no.
The local deputy would buy the beer, and then he would take our car keys, and we would ride around in the deputy's car drinking beer because he didn't want us driving while we were drinking. He didn't want us throwing beer cans on the street like we sometimes did. And that was their idea of making everybody safe because we were going to drink. I mean, we're probably going to drink. And I'm sitting there looking at Louis, and my dad would have killed Louis. I mean, he'd have just killed him. And Louis's like, oh, Merv, he said, the boy can't talk. He said, well, I'll beat him. I'll just beat him if he doesn't start talking. And he goes, Merv, he said, won't do any good because he knows that if he does talk, everybody else in town will start beating on him, all the other guys in town. And finally, just out of disgust, my dad said, lock him up and don't ever come home again. And he walks out of the jail. Louis just looks at me. He said, "You got a place to go?" And I said, "Yeah, I got a place to go." And he said, "Hey, thanks, by the way, for not telling your dad that, Shifty Collins was the guy's name. He's long dead, so I guess I can call him out now." He said, "Thanks for not telling your dad that Shifty bought you all the beer." And I then lived in a boarding house. I told you this is a long story, by the way. I lived in a boarding house for $6 a week. I was pumping gas at Pete's Standard Station, and I lived in this boarding house for $6 a week with a whole bunch of rock truck drivers down in this lady's basement, Bessie Johnson's basement. And my grandmother wasn't supposed to, but she would wash and iron my clothes and, slide me $1 or $2 here and there and bring me the occasional peach pie and fried chicken and the like. And Newt Pettit, man, I'm going down memory lane here. Newt Pettit was this town alcoholic and would wake me up about 2 o'clock in the morning and always had a big basket of fried chicken. I have no idea where he got it. And we'd sit there on the edge of the cot drinking beer and eating fried chicken with Newt Pettit, because if you didn't, he'd just beat you up. I mean, he was crazy. And shortly before I graduated from high school, though, my dad came and got me and took me home for the last, I don't know, two weeks or so of my high school. And I had already enrolled in the Navy because I figured there's really not much of a future here for me to do anything else. And my mom just wanted me to come home. So I went back home, finished high school there, went to the Navy like a week after I graduated from high school, did 3 years in the Navy, and then just started this long, crazy journey that has brought me to doing podcasts.
It's unbelievable. Yeah. So it's interesting. One of the questions I had for you was, is there a particular coach or a teacher or someone that you remember growing up that had a huge impression on you? By the way, it can't be the deputy. Okay, we know. No. So who was it that you felt really had a defining piece in your life?
There were a couple, but in my personal life, it was a guy by the name of Gene Evans, and I mean, other than my dad had this obvious impact on me, because as I've said on the banquet circuit many times, this was a man who, as did Gene Evans, by the way, this was a man who demanded greatness because he expected it. He wasn't afraid to demand it because he expected it, and I think that has carried through my entire life. My sophomore year, I flunked every class I took. I was basically your high B+ honor roll type student. But my sophomore year, I just fell off the rails and I just went stupid. And I wanted to prove to everybody that I was really a wild guy. So I flunked every class I took, except Lowell Arps, my biology teacher, and thank goodness I didn't have more of him. Lowell Arps came up to me and said, "Mr. Hansen, you've got like a 41 average. But I'm going to give you a passing grade," because I was about 6'4" as a sophomore. And I would have been on the starting varsity basketball team, which is an incredible thing in Logan, Iowa, to be a sophomore, and I would have been a starter. And he said, "We need you on the basketball team." And I said, "Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Arps. I'll never forget this." He was standing, I can picture it. He was standing right by the window. And he said, I do appreciate it, but I said, my other 4 teachers didn't see it that way, so I don't think it's going to help much. So we had no pass, no play, one, in Logan, Iowa, and we had no pass, no play in my dad's household long before Texas thought they might give this a shot. So I go home. I'm thinking he might kill me this time, but he didn't. He just, it was almost more effective because he just had this look of disgust on his face that I've never really gotten out of my mind. Because he could be rather tough. And I thought there's a serious beatdown coming here. And instead, I had a downstairs basement, and he just met me at the top of the stairs and just started screaming at me. He said, "Get in that bedroom." He said, "You're grounded for 9 weeks." And he said, "Don't even think about getting out of this house again." And people don't really have an appreciation for this, but when Merv Hansen grounds you, you're grounded. So for 9 weeks, because we had 9-week quarters, not 6 weeks like they do in Texas. We had 9-week quarters. For 9 weeks, we lived right across the street from the school. I would leave the house at 8:25 to walk that 100 yards maybe, to the school. And at 4:30, when school was out, I had until 4:32 to be back inside the house. Sunday morning, my mom drove me to church, and then she drove me back home. And that's the only sunshine I saw. For 9 weeks, that's the only sunshine I saw. I had a vitamin D deficiency that was amazing. At the end of that 9 weeks, I'm on the honor roll. I mean, there's not a whole lot to do. We only had 3 TV channels back then, so there wasn't a whole lot of TV to watch. So I actually cracked a book, and I'm on the honor roll. I now go out for the basketball team, and Gene Evans was the varsity coach, and he was also my baseball coach when I was a kid, and just one of the most impactful people that's ever influenced my life, and mainly because of this one right here. The first game, he said, Mr. Hansen. They tend to call everybody by Mr. back then. He said, Mr. Hansen, you're going to play JV basketball. Because, we started in the first part of October or November. And he said, you should have been here then. I'm on the JV team. Now, do you know the difference between varsity basketball in Logan, Iowa, and the JV basketball team? The varsity had warm-up jackets and snap-on pants. They had like a 9-piece pep band. The stands are filled. They had the 6 best-looking, cutest girls in the school were our cheerleaders, and the popcorn smell would just waft its way through the gymnasium. Junior varsity, you had no warm-up suits. You had one kid over there trying to tune up a clarinet for a pep band. We had 2 fat girls who had pimples who were our cheerleaders. And the popcorn hadn't even started cooking yet, and there were like 8 people in the stands because sometimes our parents didn't even want to watch you play JV basketball. I scored 41 points against Woodbine. We're in the locker room after the game, between games. Here comes Gene Evans. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, I'll accept your apology. Yeah. And Gene Evans walks in and looks at Harley Erickson, my JV coach, and says, Mr. Hansen is a little bit too tall and a little bit too good to be on this JV basketball team. And I'm sitting there thinking, yes, I'm glad to know you've recognized that now. And he says, Harley, from this point forward, when Mr. Hansen scores 10 points, take him out of the game and sit him down. Oh. And I thought, well, you're kidding. So the next game, I score like 10 points right off the bat, and out of the game I go. So I spent my entire sophomore year passing the ball, and I go, the heck with it, I'm tired. I scored 10 and sit down. But as Jim Hornbeck and Lynn Fields and Mark Clark and Tim Michael will tell you, my junior and senior years, I didn't do any more passing. that ball came to me, it's going up. I'm sorry. I passed all I wanted to my sophomore year. And it changed my entire life. And I've told this story to every kid I possibly can. The problem when you're 15, 16 years old, it never occurred to me that I'd be 55 someday. It wasn't even on the horizon. And if I had a school full of Lowell Arps, he's a nice man, but if I had had an entire support system of Lowell Arps who looked at me and said, we know you didn't crack a book, but don't worry about it. You're too good a player. And if I had a dad who said, what really matters here is this boy plays basketball, like so many teachers and parents do today, and most importantly, if I had a coach who realized that his team would be better with me on it, and consequently was willing to overlook my failures, you would have never heard of me, because I would have never cracked a book again. I hated school. The academic aspect of school. I was voted the most school-spirited my senior year, and I was. I loved the environment of school. I never did enjoy the book learning aspect of it, but they changed my life. And I've seen thousands of kids today Junior Miller went to the University of Nebraska coming out of Odessa, and he couldn't read. Turned out he had dyslexia, but nobody in Odessa ever bothered to even ask. They sent him to the gymnasium. He comes out of high school at 6'7" and 240 and runs like the wind. And Nebraska finds out that he's got dyslexia, and as the academic counselor at Nebraska told me, he should sue the entire school district in the state of Texas for what they did to him, because they never educated him at all. They just kept pushing him forward because of his unbelievable athletic gifts. I was the fortunate one. I didn't have coaches and teachers and a dad who ever really cared about my athletic gifts to that extent. And if they had, you would have never heard of me.
Great stuff. Dale, talk a little bit before we segue into your broadcasting, career. Talk a little bit about the Navy. How did that influence you in your life?
It didn't help. I tell you the one thing it did. It did convince me that the military budget is out of whack, because we could have saved a lot of money because there was no reason for me to be there. No, but people always say to me, it's a very embarrassing thing to say. People, in fact, this just came up last night at dinner with this function I was hosting, and this woman said, I know you served in Vietnam. I said, no. I said, let's back this up again. I served during Vietnam. Huge difference. I spent most of my time in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and no one from North Vietnam ever set foot in San Juan, Puerto Rico while I was there defending that island. I mean, I did the best I could. But I went to the Navy just out of necessity, coming out of high school, thinking, much like the young people with ISF, thinking that I really didn't have any options. I didn't think I was going to have a family structure that would be there to support me when I was 19, 20, 21 years old. So I really initially signed up out of necessity on the one hand, and then also because I didn't want to go to Vietnam, obviously. I'd already seen the horrors of that mistake. And, the Army was only 2 years, but it usually meant Vietnam for a guy like me, and I didn't want to do that. The Air Force, which is where most people in my area were kind of opting for, that seemed to be a bit safer, but it was 4 years. And I thought, and the Navy was 4 years. Well, they came up with this thing at the time called the kiddie cruise. And if you got in before you were 18, you got out before you were 21. So you got 3 years, and you got all this. And I thought, being the middle-of-the-road, compromising person that I am, I thought, that's the perfect answer. And it was. So this buddy of mine, Donnie Collins, and I signed up together, and on the buddy plans, we got to go to boot camp together. And then here again, Donnie looks at me, and I said, great, let's go to San Diego, which is where they had boot camp. They had boot camp in San Diego and boot camp in Great Lakes, Illinois, which I'd never heard of, but San Diego, oh, my gosh. And Donnie looks at me and said, no, we're not going to San Diego. He said, we're going to Great Lakes. I said, why? I mean, San Diego, that's just gorgeous. He said, yes. He said, if you go to San Diego, they kind of keep pushing you that direction, and you eventually might end up in Vietnam. He said, if you go to Great Lakes, they'll send us the other direction. And he went to Boston, and I went to Maryland. And then I went onto a ship and ended up down in Puerto Rico my whole time. And it was a joke. As I tell people, I think I was pretty remarkable. I made E4 twice, which in a 3-year cycle, that's not the easiest thing to do. But I was a horrible sailor. I hated everything about it, and I do to this day. And it's not a matter of not respecting the military. I do. I have a great deal of respect for the military, the individuals, and some of the things they do. But I just think it's a joke. I mean, I just think the whole thing's a joke. And I remember one of the very first days in boot camp, I'd never shaved in my life. I can't grow a beard today, that amounts to anything. And we had this inspection. And there's not a hair on my face. I mean, I have got the smoothest baby butt face at 17 that a young boy's ever had. And this guy just starts screaming at me. He said, what are you, like one of those hippies? You got a beard? And I'm like, and I did. I swear I went, really? Where would that be? Is there hair there? because this is how stupid I was. I always wanted to be able to grow a beard, and now I spent the last 50 years of my life going, I would pay a lot of money if I could just put a stop to this nonsense, you know. And I just kind of laughed. Then we had you had to polish your shoes. I mean, you could have shaved in those shoes, and he just stomps on them. And my T-shirt was filthy, which I had spent and I just started laughing. You know, I mean, I from the get-go, this is just a game. So I did get popped. I was a radioman, and I'm in this so-called top secret area, but it was on the base at Patuxent River, Maryland. And my job was to send the messages that the planes were down. So, like, I would come on duty, and I said, how many planes we got up? We got 7 planes up doing whatever. So once those 7 planes landed, now I just sit there and read a book. You know, I'm now done. Well, there was a very attractive young lady downstairs who ran the food machines and the hamburgers. We all did it. I never admitted this then because you protect my guys, but we all did it. You know, all your planes are down. You go downstairs, you have a hamburger, and you flirt with this girl. I come walking back up, and the door's locked. And I walk down the hall. There's the commander of the base. And I go, excuse me, Commander. I said, do you have a key? I said, my door's locked. Yes, you violated the integrity. You abandoned your post. I went, no, I just went downstairs to get a hamburger. I mean, what are you talking about? And he then calls my lieutenant, and we had to sit there till dawn. And there must have been 80 books of different descriptions of, whatever. Books that we never cracked open one time. And had to go through each and every page to make sure that the Russians hadn't snuck on the base, driven down to the point of the island where we were at by the airfield, walked past the security that we had at the front door, come upstairs, and steal the top secret books. Oh, yeah, you got me. So I had to go to what they call captain's mast. I'm married at that time, married my high school sweetheart. We're living off base in an apartment. We had no money, had no phone, had nothing. She stays up all night just starching that uniform. I'm polishing those shoes. I'm playing the game. And I promise you this is a true story. Most of this stuff I just make it up, but I promise you this is a true story. I go to this captain's mast, and they bust me for abandoning my post or, whatever it was. And I'm doing the best I can not to laugh. I really am. I go back in. This lieutenant starts screaming at me. Because, you know how the chain of command, now he's in trouble, and I get that part, but, yeah, okay. And he's trying to get me to, tell on all the other guys, and I'm holding firm, obviously. And then he starts making fun of my uniform. And I can't even say what he said, and I absolutely cannot say what I said. But he said, you look like a slob. He said, your uniform looks horrible. And I just start dropping F-bombs on this lieutenant. And I said, my wife works 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're making like $98 a month on a Navy pay. She's washed and ironed this uniform early this morning so that I'd look as good as possible. You can say anything you want to say to me. Don't you ever say another thing about my uniform because my wife did it. With just a few other words sprinkled in as we go. And I'm thinking, you could take me to the brig right now. And I swear, he just backed up. He just backed off. He said, well, I'm going to find the worst ship I can put you on. And he succeeded. Except that ship then went to San Juan, Puerto Rico in October. And I spent October through the end of March of 68, 69, cruising around the Caribbean, which is a place I just fell in love with, and I've been back to about 10 times since, because I said to every bartender and every place in that whole area, I'm coming back someday when I can actually afford it. And we've done it about 10 times. And so in that sense, it had a great influence on my life, but I'm always embarrassed when people thank me for my service, because as I said to the woman last night, not if you knew my service, you wouldn't.
Dale, most of our listeners, they know you as Channel 8 sportscaster here in Dallas, but man, quite a journey to get where you are today. Yeah. So talk a little bit about 2 or 3 of the defining moments in your broadcasting career, and kind of latch up to the Navy and post-Navy, and then what happens to get you where you are today?
Well, this has also been an interesting journey. I get out of the Navy in 1969. I get a job as a bill collector for Dial Finance. And the guy actually says to me, never forgot this either. The guy actually says to me, please take the job, because if you don't, I got to hire an N-word. And it offended me, but I was married. I had a young kid. I have no education. I've got a iffy Navy record at best. So I'll take the job. So I become a bill collector at Dial Finance. And I don't know, 6 months there, I'm moving up. I was actually pretty good at it. I kind of enjoyed tracking people down. And I had a certain gift of massaging people. I was never that screaming guy, but I had a certain gift at massaging people to send me a check. And so I move up. And this was one of the first things I learned about business that I hated. They then switched. They used to have what they call a P30, which means you're like, okay, you just forgot to make your payment. Then 30 to 60 was, where is that payment? And then 60 to 90, which is, well, this could be bad. And then, of course, the people that were what they call P90s, we had to like go find them or repossess whatever they bought at a store or whatever. Well, when you start, I'm just on that dropping a, hey, did you forget about me? The occasional, sorry to bother you at home, but, it's been a month now. And the guy above me, he wasn't very good. So they flipped the roles. So I took his delinquent accounts, and he then took over mine. I said, great, I'd like his check. He said, well, you get a raise after 6 months. I said, yeah, but I've been here like 3 months, and you've promoted me to this job. I want my check. He said, well, no, it doesn't work that way. I said, well, that's just stupid. Why not pay me for what I'm doing? So it kind of started me on this, which has followed me my whole life. Well, eventually, I flipped this guy into a big loan. He was an engineering student at UNO, University of Nebraska at Omaha. And he comes in like he did every few months to get his money for tuition. And this was shortly after the civil rights legislation had passed, and you no longer could you ask about race. Stephen Veach was the general manager of Dial Finance in Omaha. And he came up with this idea that if it's a person of color, you put an X in the corner of the application, which I refused to do. So I turned this application in, had all the boxes checked, had all the references. The kid was great. The kid never missed a payment, nothing. Stephen Veach actually says to me, great job. You moved him up to a bigger loan, better interest rate for us, because the kid couldn't borrow money anyplace else because they wouldn't loan it to a black kid in Omaha, Nebraska. The kid walks in to get his money. Stephen Veach grabs me, takes me around the corner and says, you didn't tell me he's an N-word. I said, oh, I'm sure I did. He said, yeah, no, look. He said, there's nothing on there. I said, oh, I must have forgot. He said, well, I'm not loaning that N-word money. I said, you've been loaning him money for 2 or 3 years. He said, yeah, but he's getting a little higher now. And I said, he's fine. 30 minutes ago, you were praising me for this loan. And the only reason you're changing your mind is because he's a black kid. I'll never forget the look on that kid's face. Stephen Veach walks up, tells him the loan, there's been a mistake, we can't make the loan. The kid walked out and just kind of looked back at me. And I've never forgotten the look on his face. So I quit. They fly a guy in from Des Moines, as a matter of fact, the head office, takes me to lunch. You've got a future in this business. What can we do? No, I don't have a future in this business. So I joined this buddy of mine. We go to I become an employment agency counselor. I started on Monday. They fired me Thursday night. We went to St. Patrick's Day party at 11:30 that day, and we didn't come back. So they fired me. I then become a food salesman for Guaranteed Foods. That lasted about 6 months, and they fired me because I had this great ability. I needed to sell 5 plans a month to make the money I wanted to live on. And as they pointed out, if I sold like 4 the first 2 weeks, I would sell 1 the second 2 weeks. Because I needed to sell 5 a month to make, $1,000 or whatever. And if I sold 1 the first 2 weeks, I sold 4 the second 2 weeks. And he said, why don't you just like do 5 and 5 or 4 and 4? And I said, nah, I don't need to work that hard. So I'm unfortunately, I'm kind of blowing a lot of these good leads for the people they had making these calls. And so they fired me. I then get a bill collector's job again, the University of Nebraska Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska. And this is why I'm so upset about the medical industry in America, because I know what a scam it is. And people would come in, and then my job was to review their insurance and their finances. And they would then say, they had I never forget this, 1287 was poor. 1288 was maybe. 1289, we want all the money you got. So if you walked in with 1289 and you hand me your Blue Cross card, you can't believe what we tested you for. I mean, you know, your wrist, you fell down and broke your wrist. Could be something wrong with your head. Maybe you hurt your ankles. We'd run tests, we would bill it, and then we'd say, oh, by the way, you owe us $1,000. Don't even think about it. 1288, turn it back a little bit. If you're 1287, you're poor. We just told you $5 a month, you're fine. That's all you had to pay. So people would come in, they're dirt poor, and they'd say, well, I've got $300 that I can get from my brother. I said, no, you don't. You get $5 a month. That's all you can afford to pay me is $5. No, I got like 3. No, you really don't. You can only afford it. So I took over. I had the D's, E's, and the F's. And when I took it over, it was averaging $25,000 a month. And I had it down to like $4,600 in no time. And so they fired me. And then I got my job in broadcasting and started my first radio job. I quit. Got fired from my second radio job in Knoxville, Iowa. Went to St. Cloud, Minnesota, got fired again. Went to Coil Radio in Omaha, Nebraska, got fired. Walked in the door of a TV station in Omaha, Nebraska, just cold, applied for the job, got hired. 2.5 years later, Bill Wilson fired me. Came to Channel 4 in Dallas. Bill Wilson fired me, and I've been at Channel 8 ever since. I've had 11 professional jobs in my life, and I've been fired from 8 of them. The flip side of that is I've applied for 12 jobs in my life, face-to-face I'm talking about, and I've been offered all 12 of them. And this is incredibly arrogant, but it is part of who I am and what I think I've been able to accomplish despite no college education, whatever. I have applied face-to-face for 12 jobs in my life, and I took 11 of them and turned the other one down in Los Angeles years ago. I've been turned down now like over 100 times. Las Vegas turned me down. Lincoln, Nebraska turned me down. Kansas City turned me down. Miami, Bernie Rosen called me a country hick. I've got a long list of people who've seen my tapes and read my resume, and we're not interested. You got no chance. But if I sit across the desk from you, you will indeed hire me. And I'm 12 for 12 in that regard. At the same time, though, I've been fired 8 times because for the longest time, I wasn't very good at sharing. And by that, I don't mean the glory or the credit. I mean everything had to be touched by me. And I finally figured out, years ago, that I'm only better when the people around me are better. When the people around me are happy with their jobs, and I give them the power to do their jobs. Just not the opportunity, not just the freedom to do their jobs. I give them the power to do their jobs. Once I figure that out, it is staggering how many individual awards and honors will come your way, how big the paycheck will become based on the work of others. Because as most of my critics will tell you, I get paid a lot of money to sit on the air and go, hey, here's Joe Trahan. Let him do it, And anyway, it's just been a great ride. And but it kind of goes back to Gene Evans and Frank Weiland that I don't ever give up. I see the problem. I recognize the mistakes I made. And instead of whining about it or complaining about it, I do the best I can to fix it. And I think that's really about all I've ever done in my life is I don't allow people to tell me what my limits are. I mean, every step of the way, people would say to me, "Where'd you go to college?" I said, "Oh, again with the college. Even the great Marty Haig, which I'll talk about later, but even the great Marty Haig, after all these jobs, Mark Gutierrez in Omaha, Nebraska, the first TV job, said to me, "Where'd you go to school?" I said, "Logan, Iowa." He said, "No, I mean, where'd you go to college, your formal education?" I said, "No, that's it. That's all I got." "Well, you can't work here." And I was a news reporter. And that's how I ended up doing sports. I was a news reporter at the time, and I was actually pretty good at it. And the phone rings. His weekend sportscaster quit. He's so upset. He looks at me and goes, "Hey, kid, you want to do sports?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "You like sports?" "Oh, I love sports." "I'm just looking for a job." And he goes, "Well, how would you like to be the weekend sportscaster?" And I said, "Well, I thought you said you had to have a college degree to work here." And he goes, "Nah, not to be a sportscaster." and so now you fast forward, 5, 6 years, and I'm interviewing with Marty Haig, and first thing he said, "By the way, where'd you go to school?" I went, "Oh, my gosh, really? After all this time?" And I looked at him, I'll never forget it. And I said, "Marty, I wish I'd have gone to college, but I never did." And Marty goes, "Oh, my goodness. We've never hired anybody without a college degree." And I said, "I understand that." I said, "But Marty, here's the deal. You're talking to me today because I've been over at Channel 4 for the past 2.5 years. You've been watching me. And you know that for whatever reason, I've got a bit of an audience that's following me. And I wish I would have gone to college, but I didn't. And I think at this point in my life, I really doubt that Bob and Martha are sitting there in Mesquite going, I'd like to keep watching Dale over at Channel 8, but I just found out he didn't go to college." And Marty started laughing, and he's, "Well, I never thought of it that way, but I guess you're right." And they hired me. And been there 35 and in the middle of my 36th year right now.
Amazing. Great segue to leadership. Dale, we're a leadership show. That's what we're about. We've got about 15 minutes left in the show, and I want to talk a little bit about leaders and the best of the best that you've ever met. So let's talk about the top 3. I want you to save the best for last, but who are the top 3 people that you would consider the best of the best in leadership, and why do you consider them the best, and what were some of the takeaways that you took away from them through this journey that really influenced you?
Well, mine is not as definitive as I'm sure many of the guests that you've had on here have been able to identify, and a lot of mine are kind of a twofer, but certainly the first person that made the impact on me, and I recognized his abilities, was Gene Evans that I referred to. I didn't get the opportunity to play basketball with him my junior and senior years, and I still regret that, because his teams won at every level. And I started playing Little League baseball for him when I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And I remember he took us to his house one time. And instead of just a typical, baseball, he sat us down. And I've never forgotten this. And unfortunately, I can't get it out of my head when I watch a baseball game. He went through every position and the entire batting order as to the whys. Now, he's talking to like 10-year-old kids. He said, "Now, here's what we're going to do. I need a leadoff hitter, and I need somebody that knows the strike zone. I don't want him up there just swinging like crazy. And I want him to be fast. A leadoff hitter should be able to run. Now, the second place hitter, he's got to be able to bunt. He's got to be able to control the bat. He's got to be able to help the guy in case we try to steal a base. The third place hitter is usually the second best hitter on the team, because the cleanup hitter is the best." And he goes through this. And the eighth place hitter, we always used to tease a kid named Rich Cobble because he was the eighth place hitter. Now, he's 17 years old. We're playing high school baseball, and then here comes the lineup, and whoever got put in that 8-hole, we did it. 8 years after the fact, 7, 8 years after the fact, "Oh, you're batting 8th. You're the worst hitter we got." Because that's what Gene had taught us. I would just run through a wall for that guy. And you always had this feeling that no matter how bad it was, he would figure something out. And we went on a run for like 6, 7 years. It really was kind of funny. I mean, we beat an all-star team from Council Bluffs in the playoffs when we were like 16 years old. We had 10 guys on our team. We had 10. And we had one little fat kid sat on the bench in case somebody broke a leg, but that's all he did. We just sit there. And we let him bat occasionally, and that was it. 9 guys. So if you had to change your pitcher, well, then the shortstop came in, and then he went to short. And the right fielder would move to third. I mean, we had 9 guys that played. And I was the cleanup hitter, by the way. But we had 9 guys. All of a sudden, we're in the playoffs, and we're playing this team from Council Bluffs. They put together an all-star team. Council Bluffs is like, at that time, was like 70,000 people. We're 1,000. And they had this whole league to themselves, but for this tournament, they decided to put an all-star team together. So not only are they a town of 70,000 people, they took the best of the 70,000. They had cheerleaders. They had guys on the, and Gene Evans looks at me, says, there's not a one of them here that's as good as you. Not a one of them. And we beat them. Beat them 5-4. And it's almost embarrassing that I can still remember that story. But he was that kind of a guy that always was encouraging and just gave you the whys, which is what I always, unfortunately, many times, I've always kind of needed the why, which is part of the reason I've been fired so many times, is that I'm not very good, even to this day, I'm not very good at just following blind orders, which is the real problem in the military. But Gene Evans was always, here's what we're going to do, and here's why we're going to do it. And we all just bought in. I mean, we just bought in. And one of the real regrets of my life is that he became a superintendent of schools. He was like an English teacher, and he was the coach of the baseball and the basketball teams. And he wanted to get into administration. So he left Logan to become a principal. And then he came back to Logan years later after I was gone as superintendent of schools. I mean, and again, which I think speaks to his leadership, because as he taught me, I then passed it on to my daughter. When I talked to him over the years, his job became coaching the coaches, coaching the other teachers, and he certainly had a gift for it. He had an absolute gift for it. And but I've always tried to do this with my guys as best I can. Here's what we're going to do, and here's why we do it this way. So that you understand it. It's not just me sitting here behind the desk going, no, you will say this, you will do that in your stories, whatever it is. But I want you to understand why. And I think once you do that, then it becomes easier to follow.
We've got just a short time left.
I talked too long. I'm sorry.
No, it's great, and it's more of a reason why we'll need to have a Dale part 2 for sure. Talk a little bit about Tom Landry. I know a few times we've sat around and had cigars together and chatted. You always seem to weave Tom Landry and his leadership in. So talk a little bit about him and how you perceive him as a leader. Well,
and Tom Landry to me was the epitome of everything that most people think he is. And I use this analogy a lot. I've been blessed to know a number of great athletes, a great number of people in sports who have these remarkable athletic skills. And at the same time, I've been blessed to know a lot of people who are just unbelievable human beings. Just marvelous human beings. Very seldom do the two cross. The great athlete is not necessarily the greatest guy. The greatest guy is not necessarily the best athlete. To me, there's only two that I would put on this pedestal. It was Tom Landry and Roger Staubach. They are as far as I know, they are exactly what you think and hope they are. So I meet Tom Landry in 1980, and I'm not in awe of much. I'm not intimidated by anybody. I was intimidated, and I was in awe of this man. I kept thinking, that's a statue. and yet that statue talks. I mean, it's amazing. He had this incredible dry sense of humor, which I respected. But what I really respected him, I think he walked the walk. He talked the talk. A lot of his players didn't like him as much as I thought, but I've also somewhat learned that a lot of people don't seem to like the true leaders, because the true leaders have to make some rather difficult decisions on occasion. Whether it's a military leader who has to send people to die. Tom Landry, I remember, he cut players, and people would just complain. And as Tom Landry said to me, I said, how do you cut that guy? He's played for you for 9 years. He doesn't want to quit. Why would you cut him? That's almost cruel. And Tom Landry, I'll never forget, Tom Landry looked at me and said, I've got an obligation to the other 46 guys. We're a better football. His time is up. He played 9 years. It's time. It was a great guy named Benny Barnes, was a safety. He said, Benny's been great for us. But Benny's slowed down a little bit. He's now in his 30s. And, I have to do what's best for the team, not what's necessarily best for Benny Barnes. And a lot of players just didn't understand that. And when I saw it, wow, he has to somewhat distance himself because he can't become buddies with all these guys because he's going to have to fire some of them. Going to end up firing all of them at some point. But the bottom line to me was he was exactly, as a young kid growing up, always watching the Cowboys on Sunday afternoons on CBS, he was exactly what I thought he was. He was amazing. He was absolutely amazing, man.
As we wrap up today's show, Dale, we've got leaders listening to the show that are different ages, that are from different places and from different professions and from all different walks of life. So here's my final question for you. What is the one thing that you would say to those folks listening today that you would consider to be the very best advice that you could give another leader?
Well, to me, the very best advice is to bring everybody into the conversation. I've worked for a lot of people who just sit behind their office or behind their desk in their ivory tower office, and they just, what seems to be rather indiscriminately, make these decisions. I respect the people who make the decisions. I understand the pecking order. And I think most people understand that there's always a pecking order. Somebody has to ultimately make the final decision. But I have a great deal of respect for the people who say, this is why we're doing this. And I think too many times, at least I've seen it in my business, and I'm sure it's somewhat true in a lot of businesses, you know, whether it's laying people off, whether it's changing a style of what we do, whatever it is, they don't want to bring everybody into the process. And I think there just has to be that constant open line of communication. I've had arguments with people at my office because one of the people that I respected the most was a guy named Marty Haig, was the greatest news director I've ever known. And he was brutal. He was hard. I mean, he would send you these memos that were just scathing. I mean, he brought me to tears. I mean, he's called me all kinds of names. I happened to respond to that kind of treatment. A person told me in management one time, well, Marty Haig could no longer work here. He couldn't work here because I was doing a lot of the same thing, screaming at people, hollering at them. Now, once I'm done, like Marty, hey, by the way, Dale, you going to play golf this weekend? How's everything going? And I'm like, well, you just called me, you know. And I kind of did that to my people, and I got in trouble for it. And this general manager says, Dale, I said, I'm just like Marty Haig. I'm hoping to be as great as Marty Haig. And she says, Marty Haig couldn't work here anymore. I mean, the times have changed. And that's probably true. But what he also did was pat you on the back, send you, hey, by the way, love that story. Great job. Beautiful writing, you know. So he would beat you down on the one hand, but he'd also always tell you. So I do it with my guys as best I can. I see a good piece of work. I send him a note. Yeah, hey, by the way, I love what you're doing with this. It's great. People will always say, I say it myself. I don't need your affirmation. You know, my check clears every other Friday. That's how I know, which is not really true. You know, I like that check, but I also like that note. Hey, by the way, that was a heck of a thing you wrote. That was a beautiful thing you said. That was a horrible thing. I'm okay on the other side, but I like feedback, and I think leaders are more successful when they bring everybody into the process, understanding they're going to have to make the final decision. But if you bring everybody into the process, I think you're going to have a happier workforce. If you have a happier workforce, you have a better place to work. If you have a better place to work, you have a better performance, a better job, more productivity. Seems pretty simple to me.
Great stuff. Dale, you have you're absolutely no doubt one of the best storytellers that I've ever met, and you have an incredible gift of making people laugh. And I can't tell you how much we appreciate you coming in and sharing some of those laughs with our listening audience today. We really appreciate your time and being on the show. And like I said before, there's just no way that you could get it all in an hour with Dale. And so we'll definitely.
I'm going to learn someday how to pare myself down, but I can't.
No, it's too good. So we'll look forward to a part 2. So as we wrap up, we've got to go back over to Blair and get our leadership trivia question answer for the week. So what you got for us, Dr. Blair?
Okay, the athlete who stunned the world in the Berlin Olympics, who went on to become honored by presidents, is Jesse Owens.
I knew that.
Dale would know that one.
Yeah.
Dale was looking at me going, "Oh, I already know this.
Yeah.
I already know this. Can't wait for an hour from now." So I can't believe he didn't blurt it out, right?
I started to, quite honestly, and I'm glad I
Thank you
didn't.
for you.
Yeah. Well, folks, that's a wrap for our podcast today. Thanks for joining us on behalf of the Carrington Group, the International Student Foundation, and our special guest, Dale Hansen. This is Tyler Tillman wishing you a good day. But remember this, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. Have a great rest of your week.
Legends in Leadership is brought to you by ISF and Carrington Group. ISF is committed to leadership development for aged-out foster care and orphan youth. ISF's mission is to transform these youth into tomorrow's leaders with scholarships, mentoring, and leadership training. Google International Student Foundation to learn more. Carrington Group is a family office with a passion for helping business leaders and their families make smart choices and fulfill their highest aspirations. Google Carrington Group Dallas, Texas to learn more.
Securities offered through Regulus Advisors, LLC. Member FINRA/SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Regal Investment Advisors, LLC, and SEC-registered investment advisor. Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors are affiliated entities. Carrington Group and this broadcast are independent of Regulus Advisors and Regal Investment Advisors.